The letter arrived wrapped in a torn scrap of linen, the handwriting stiff and unsure. Eliza Granger read it with trembling fingers by the dull light of a lantern, the flame jittering like her breath. It came from a place called Devil's Throat, Wyoming Territory, and was signed in blunt, careful lines by a man named Matthew Klein. He wasn't a poet. He didn't promise love or kindness or even safety. Just this: I have land and I am alone. If you come, I will keep you warm and I won't raise my hand in anger. I've seen what harm a man can do. I want peace. If you do too, write back. Eliza had read worse letters. She had lived worse men. Her body bore the reminders: a rib that never healed right, a notch of missing flesh behind her ear, the dull white scar where her front tooth had gone after her last husband shoved her down the boarding house stairs. She wasn't proud of what she'd survived. Survival is not prideful, it just is. They called it a bride's catalog, a paper parade of lonely men in far lands asking for a woman like someone might order a mule or a grindstone. Eliza had never imagined answering one. But the boarding house was running dry, and Ma Gert, who let her stay for free in exchange for laundry work and silence, was dying by degrees. Eliza didn't write back right away. She folded the letter flat and slid it under the floorboard by her cot. 2 nights later, after Ma Gert started coughing blood, she wrote her reply in pencil on butcher paper. I am not pretty and I am not young. I can clean and sew and fix a horse's leg in a storm. I don't ask for much, but I won't be struck again. If you lie, I will leave. If you drink, I won't come. I've got nothing left but my name and I aim to keep it. If you still want me, I'll come on the 4th train in May. She didn't send a photograph. She didn't own one. The days passed like brittle pages in a bad book. Ma Gert died before spring. The undertaker asked if Eliza wanted to say words. She didn't. She just lowered the box with 2 strangers and went back to scrub the blood from the walls. The train left from St. Louis with 4 women crammed into a car meant for freight. One was 16 and already pregnant. Another was running from a constable's badge. Eliza didn't ask questions. She kept her bag close and her coat tighter. Every town they passed was grayer than the last, until at last the conductor hollered Devil's Throat, and she stepped down into a land that looked carved by wind and punishment. The platform was empty. Then he appeared. He was taller than she expected, sun-bitten and quiet, with hands like old rope. Matthew Klein tipped his hat once and said, "You made it." No smile, no hug, just those words like a rock against the current. Eliza nodded. She didn't know what else to do. The ride to his ranch was long and silent. Dust curled in through the buckboard seams. His land stretched raw and wide, a hollow place with fences that leaned and a barn half collapsed. There were no animals except 2 horses and a thin black dog with a nervous gait. "This is it," he said when they arrived. "I won't pretend it's much." Eliza stepped down. The house was wood and stone and nothing else. It stood like a man with a bullet in his gut, refusing to fall but clearly shot. Inside, the walls were bare. 1 table, 1 stove, 2 chairs, a Bible, and a blanket folded like a soldier's secret. He showed her the room that could be hers, small but clean. She unpacked her bag and placed her sewing kit on the table like it was a stake in the earth. They didn't touch that first night. She didn't even take off her boots. In the days that followed, Eliza cleaned. She stitched every curtain by hand and patched the roof with canvas. She took stock of the kitchen and the root cellar and boiled the well water twice before drinking. Matthew let her be. He worked the land with hard, silent purpose. The dog, she learned, was named Jonah, and he only wagged his tail for Matthew. One afternoon, she found a bottle under the bed. Her breath caught. The label was gone, but the shape was familiar. She didn't say anything that day. The next morning it was gone. She never saw it again. He was not a talkative man, but she learned him slowly, like a tune by ear. He had a scar down his left arm, knife deep, and never explained it. He spoke to his horses more than he spoke to her. At night, he left a candle burning between their rooms, but he never crossed the hall. After a month, she asked, "Why did you send for me?" He looked up from the fence he was mending. His eyes were gray, not soft. "Because I was alone, and I knew what that does to a man." She didn't press him. She understood more than he could know. But still, something inside her stayed clenched. The part of her that remembered boots in hallways and hands too rough and promises broken with a belt. She flinched when he moved too fast. She locked the door at night with a chair under the handle. He never asked her why. He just waited. And in that waiting, she began to trust him. Not because he said the right things, but because he said nothing when silence was the kindest choice. Then one day she heard gunfire, not far. And the past she thought she'd buried turned out to be following close behind. The gunshot came at dusk, loud and wrong in the clean air. Eliza dropped the pail she was hauling, water sloshing over her boots. She turned toward the sound and saw Matthew already moving, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the line of hills to the north. Jonah barked once, then lowered himself to the dirt like it was instinct. Matthew didn't speak. He just looked at her and she understood. Get inside, stay low. She obeyed. From behind the kitchen window, she watched him walk toward the barn, calm as anything, though she saw the tension in his shoulders. He moved like a man used to violence but tired of it, as if every step cost him more than he let on. Eliza counted her breaths and lit the lamp low. She took the hunting knife from the drawer and set it beside the flour tin. Her hands were steady. She hated that they were. When Matthew returned, he was alone, but his face was darker than before. "Wasn't meant for us," he said, "but close, probably poachers, or someone passing through too fast." She nodded, but she didn't believe it. Neither did he. That night she didn't sleep, not because she feared the shot, but because she feared what else might follow it. There was something out there, and it smelled like the old world, like men with fists and chains and knowing your name without permission. 2 days passed in quiet tension. The wind dragged grit across the porch. Jonah wouldn't leave Matthew's side. Then, while hanging clothes to dry, Eliza spotted the tracks. Boot prints, wide set, 3 sets at least, too fresh to be from before. She showed them to Matthew. He squatted by the prints, touched one with 2 fingers, and frowned. "You recognize 'em?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I don't like their shape. Men who walk like this, they're used to hurting something." Eliza swallowed. Her mouth tasted of dust and old fear. He posted up that night on the porch, rifle across his knees. He didn't ask her to keep him company, but she brought him coffee anyway, hands wrapped tight around the tin cup. He took it, sipped, and said nothing. Only after an hour of silence did he speak. "There was a time I was like them," he said. She didn't move. "Not with women," he added, as if that clarified anything. "But angry, drunk, looking to start something. The war took parts of me I still can't name." She listened, not out of sympathy, but because it's rare to hear a man speak plain. "I killed a man once," he said. "Not in war, after." She didn't ask why. Instead, she said, "I think I understand." And in that stillness, with coyotes howling far off and nothing between them but regret and warmth cooling in the cup, something shifted. The next morning she woke to hoofbeats. 3 riders, men, all of them bearded and slouched, their jackets dusty and rifles holstered loose. They didn't come to the house at first, just circled the fence line like wolves sniffing a wound. Eliza stood by the window, back straight. She didn't call for Matthew. She wanted to see what kind of men they were. One of them spit and pointed toward the barn. Another laughed. Matthew stepped out before they got closer. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't have to. Can I help you boys? He asked, loud enough to carry. The one with the red bandana spoke first. Just looking for a friend, heard he might have passed this way. Matthew shook his head. Ain't seen nobody but wind and my own horse. The second man, older and meaner, leaned forward in the saddle. That your wife I see behind the curtain. Eliza didn't flinch. She let the curtain fall. Matthew's voice stayed level. That's my business. You boys best ride on. Silence stretched. The dog growled once. Then the oldest tipped his hat mockingly. Well now, we'll be seeing you again soon, mister. They turned and rode slow, making sure to leave prints wide and obvious, like a mark. Matthew came inside. She met him at the table. You know them. He nodded, not by name, but I know the type. Were they lying? Yes. Eliza stared at the floor. They were looking for me. He sat down, the chair creaked. You want to tell me why? She didn't want to, but the words came out anyway. I left a man in Missouri. He wasn't mine, not truly, but he owned everything around me. Claimed I stole from him, claimed a lot of things. I didn't look back when I ran. Maybe I should have. Matthew didn't blink. What did you take? Only myself. That was the first time he reached for her hand. I won't let him take you again, he said. And it was the first time she believed a man when he said such a thing. The next day, they set traps on the perimeter and cut new lines of sight through the brush. Matthew buried a second rifle behind the shed. Eliza practiced with her revolver until her wrist ached. They didn't wait to be victims. They prepared to survive. But the men came back anyway. 3 nights later. Only this time they weren't laughing. They brought fire. The first blaze lit the barn like a lantern against the black sky. The horses shrieked. Jonah bolted out from under the porch, barking into the fire's breath. Eliza grabbed her coat and the rifle by the stove, already knowing the bucket would be useless. Matthew was ahead of her. Shirtless, barefoot, moving through the grass like a shadow with teeth. He didn't scream, he didn't shout, he just moved. Fire danced along the barn's edge and the dry timber roared back. Eliza stood beside the porch, rifle aimed steady toward the hills. She saw them then, 3 shapes, 2 on horseback, 1 on foot with a lantern, laughing, watching the barn burn like it was a bonfire for devils. She didn't hesitate, she fired. The man on foot dropped the lantern and dove behind a tree. The horses reared, one rider losing control and tumbling hard onto the dirt, the other cursed, pulling a pistol and firing blindly toward the house. Matthew didn't flinch. He reached the barn and threw the door open. Smoke rolled over him like sea fog, and within seconds he dragged out the first horse, then the second, both lathered in terror and heat. Jonah circled them, snapping at the air, barking until his throat cracked. Eliza reloaded. Another shot rang out. She ducked behind the water barrel. Wood splintered beside her cheek. Her heart beat like a drum beneath her ribs, but her hands stayed sure. She leaned out and aimed again. She saw the older one, beard, flat-brim hat, eyes like carved flint, lining up a shot at Matthew's back. She didn't think. She pulled the trigger. The shot rang clearer than thunder. The man fell back, rifle spilling from his hands. Everything went still for a second. The fire hissed, the horses screamed. The third man ran. By the time the barn had collapsed into coals, the invaders were gone, one limping, one bleeding, one dead in the field. Matthew stood in the glow, soot on his chest, eyes turned to the hills. Jonah whined and licked at Eliza's boots. She didn't move. She had shot a man. She had ended a life. And all she felt was breath in her lungs and the slow returning silence. That night they didn't speak. They sat at the kitchen table, black with smoke, Eliza's hands blistered from the barrel's heat. Matthew poured water for both of them. Neither drank. The next morning, Matthew buried the body without ceremony. Eliza watched. The wind kept trying to tear the hat from the dead man's head, so Matthew tied it to a post instead. A warning, not out of vengeance but practicality. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him then, really looked. His face was drawn, smoke-shadowed, something broken in the crease near his eye, but there was no fear, only a promise settling into bone. "We should leave," she said, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. He shook his head. "If we run, they'll follow. If we stay, we build." That afternoon, they reinforced the door, dug new trenches, set lines of pitch-soaked cloth around the edges of the field. Fire had come once, it would not surprise them again. Eliza learned to shoot with both hands. Matthew taught her how to read tracks in shallow grass, how to kill a man quick if you didn't have a bullet left. These were not the lessons a wife was meant to know, but she was no wife in the way the world understood. She was a survivor, and this man was not her master, he was her wall. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. It was nailed to a stake just beyond the well, weighted down by a severed hawk. Eliza read it aloud, while Matthew watched the ridge. "She's ours, you know it. She stole blood. We'll come to collect. There's more of us than bullets in your house. You should have let her go." There was no name, just a crude mark that looked like a spade carved into a man's chest. Matthew took the letter and burned it without a word. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The memory of the hawk clawing in the dirt played behind her eyes. She got up, walked barefoot through the dark, and found him by the fence line, still in his boots, hands wrapped in cloth. "You should sleep," she said. He didn't answer. "They won't stop," she said. "They'll regret not stopping," he replied. She sat beside him. The wind smelled like ash and stubborn grass. "You don't have to protect me," she said. He turned to her. I'm standing beside you." That was when she took his hand, not gently, not romantically, just strong and sure and human. He didn't let go. The next day, Matthew rode into town, left her behind with 2 rifles, 3 traps, and enough dry goods for a siege. She didn't ask why. He told her he had a name to chase, and that was enough. He was gone for 4 days. On the 5th, he came back with a bullet graze on his shoulder and a bounty poster torn in half. The man she had shot had brothers, 5 to be exact. They ran with a crew, called themselves the Kittle Gang, known for raiding outposts and trafficking women out of territory towns. Matthew had found one in a saloon and left him broken in a pig pen. He said nothing of what else he'd done. That night she kissed him. Not soft, not sweet. She kissed him like a woman who had learned that safety came with blood on your hands and truth in your bones, and he held her like she wasn't fragile, but real. The moon watched, the prairie whispered nothing. There were 5 men left, and she would not be afraid of any of them. By autumn, the sky had sharpened into flint and wind. Mornings turned cruel before the sun rose, and every breath out hung on the air like a ghost. Eliza chopped wood with a vengeance, her muscles wiry now, her hands rough and sure. The burned scars from the barn had healed into pale ridges on her arms. She didn't cover them. The Kittle brothers had not returned, but that meant nothing. Matthew set traps farther out now, lines strung with bells, stones carefully stacked to fall if disturbed. He widened the clearing by 50 yards and sharpened every fence post into a stake. The ranch looked more like a fort, and that was intentional. Neither of them spoke of what would come, but it hung between them, felt in every passing crow, every broken twig in the woods. Then 2 days before the first frost, she saw the smoke again. East this time, not a barn fire, a campfire, close, too close. Matthew was in town fetching winter grain. She was alone. Eliza didn't panic. She fed Jonah a sliver of salted meat, checked both rifles, filled her pockets with cartridges, and walked toward the smoke. She found them half a mile out. Two of them young, too young to wear death so easy. One was skinning a hare. The other was half asleep, rifle across his knees, lips cracked from windburn. Eliza took cover in the pines and waited. She didn't want to kill unless she had to, but she'd do it. Then she heard them talking. "She'll come," the skinny one said. "Boss says she's soft. All women are. We wait, she'll come to us." The other boy spat. "You sure this is even the right farm?" "Course it is." He said she had a scar behind her ear. "Boss, don't forget a face." Eliza stayed hidden, listening. Then she stepped out with her rifle level. They froze. The skinny one reached for his belt. She fired once, warning shot. Dirt leapt by his boot. He dropped the knife, raised his hands. "I'm only going to say this once," she said. "Go west. Walk until your boots rot. Don't come back. If I see you again, I won't miss." The one who'd been sleeping started crying, not loud, just quiet, leaking tears like something broken in him had cracked open. Boys, not men, just tools used by filthier hands. They ran. She watched them go until they were gone. And then she buried the hare. It didn't deserve to be skinned for nothing. That night Matthew returned. She told him everything. His jaw worked silent until he said, "They're circling, finding our soft edges." "We don't have any," she said. He nodded, but they both knew that wasn't true. They had each other. The next week was war in slow motion. A broken gate in the morning, a calf gutted and left in the well. Jonah came home with a wound across his flank, not deep, but enough to send a message. Matthew wanted to chase them, ride out into the hills and end it before it began. Eliza said no. "They want you gone. They think I'm easier." She was right. They came again 3 nights later, full dark. 5 men this time, each with torches and guns and cruelness carved into them like birthright. The trapline caught the first one. He screamed when the stake pierced his thigh and dragged him halfway down the ditch. The others didn't stop. They spread out, circling like carrion birds, moving toward the house. Matthew fired from the root cellar. Eliza took the west window. Jonah limped between rooms, snarling. One torch hit the porch. Fire bloomed up the side wall. Eliza shot the man who threw it, square in the chest. Another bullet shattered the front window. Glass sliced her cheek. She didn't feel it. Then the back door exploded inward. The biggest of them came through, dirty coat, fists like bricks, a spade tattoo on his neck. He looked at her and grinned. "I told you I'd come," he said. She raised her rifle. He swung the butt of his shotgun and knocked it from her hands. She didn't scream. She reached for the knife on the stove. He caught her by the arm, twisted. "I should have chained you when I had the chance," he said. "Tamed you proper." She head-butted him. His nose broke with a crunch. He howled. She stabbed the knife into his side, deep and twisting, then again and again. He collapsed, hands slick with blood, gasping, "You bitch." She didn't let him finish. She grabbed the cast iron pan and caved in the rest of his words. When Matthew reached her, the fight was already done. Blood smeared her arms and soaked into the wood. The man was still, eyes open. She looked at Matthew. He looked back. Outside, the shooting had stopped. The last of the Kittle gang had fled. One body lay near the fence line, another by the porch. They didn't speak. That night they burned the bodies. No crosses, no markers, just ash for the wind. The ranch was quiet again. But it was not the same place. Neither were they. They buried the pan behind the barn. Eliza washed the blood from the floor, then her skin, then her hair. It took hours. It didn't matter. She sat on the porch afterward, bare feet on the wood, looking toward the empty hills. Matthew joined her. "You did what I couldn't," he said. "I did what had to be done," she said. They watched the horizon burn with stars. "I used to think I was too scared to start again," she said after a long silence. "Too broken." He looked at her, not with pity, not with awe, just with truth. "You weren't scared," he said. "You were surviving." Jonah limped up and curled beside them. The sky began to lighten at the edges. It was almost morning. And this time they would meet it together. Spring came without permission. One morning the frost was just gone, and the earth smelled like something breathing. Green pushed its way through dead grass, and the creek behind the western ridge ran fast with thaw. Snow still clung to the mountains in the distance, but the land below was waking. Eliza stepped into the morning barefoot. She stopped fearing the cold. Her feet had hardened like the rest of her. She poured feed for the chickens, whistled once for Jonah, and ran her fingers through the mare's mane. Her left hand still ached when the weather shifted, a reminder from the fire, but she didn't mind. The scar was hers now. It didn't belong to anyone else. The house had changed. The porch was rebuilt stronger, the walls double-lined with stone and clay. They'd sealed the windows tight and reinforced the back door with iron. It looked less like a home and more like a place you could survive in. But inside there were things no one else would see. A red quilt she had stitched by firelight, shelves full of dried herbs and bark she'd foraged herself. A folded letter on the mantel, still sealed. She hadn't decided whether to open it. Matthew had written it before the last fight in case he died. She found it weeks later in his coat pocket. He hadn't told her about it. She hadn't asked. Some things held more weight unread. She spent her days working the land, her nights wrapped in the warmth of a man who never asked more than she offered. Matthew wasn't a romantic. He'd never once said he loved her. But when the wind rose at night and made the walls groan like a dying ship, he'd pull her close, his hands steady on her ribs, and she'd sleep without fear. And that, she knew, was love. There was peace for a while, not silence. The past didn't vanish, but it stopped chasing. In early May, a marshal came riding up the valley road. Clean coat, silver star, boots that had seen more saloons than trails. He didn't dismount at first, just sat there squinting at the house. Matthew stood on the porch, arms crossed. Eliza came out beside him. The marshal tipped his hat. "Heard about some trouble out this way," he said. "Men gone missing, blood found near a fence line." Matthew didn't speak. The marshal looked at Eliza. "You folks have any knowledge about that?" Eliza stared at him until he looked away. The marshal cleared his throat. "Funny thing about men like that," he said, "tend to get themselves dead, especially when they go sniffing around where they're not wanted." Matthew nodded once. The marshal smiled tight. "Well, just the same, I'll be heading on." He turned his horse and didn't look back. That night, Eliza sat at the table and opened the letter. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope I went standing beside you. I hope I earned that much. You don't owe me anything, Eliza, not your grief, not your kindness. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to live after, all I ask is that you let the land make you new, not gentler, just whole." She folded it carefully and put it back where she found it. The years passed, not fast and not kind, but honest. They never married. There was no preacher, and neither of them cared. A child came the following spring, a boy, quiet like Matthew, sharp-eyed like her. She taught him how to climb before he could speak, how to gut a rabbit before he turned 5. He learned the weight of silence and the sound of lies and the feel of steel in hand. They didn't raise him for peace. They raised him for truth. When he asked her years later why they had no family but each other, she told him, "Because I earned the right to choose, and I chose your father. He listened when no one else did. That saved me more than any bullet." Sometimes she dreamed of St. Louis, of the boarding house, the dead weight of Ma Gert's cough in the walls, the bruises she'd carried like fingerprints. But the dreams didn't own her. She had built something in the middle of nowhere, not just a home. A legacy made from grit and defiance and scarred love. The wind came every season, and the mountains never changed. But she did. She was not the girl who had flinched at a knock on the door. She was not the woman who feared her own shadow. She was Eliza Granger. And she was no one's bride. She was a storm that learned to settle. And the land, in the end, made her whole.